So let's talk about that. Michaela Cash has spoken about that as well. So firstly, whether a teacher merely for being gay, for example, could never be sacked. What about the hiring process? You think the same thing should apply? So how does that even work? I mean, would someone would be able to be asked if they're gay, would they, or if they're in an interview?
Well, you would hope that wouldn't be a question that someone's asked, but what we have said in the new legislation is that schools, as they do, can give preference to people of their own faith. So if you're a Jewish Orthodox school, it's pretty natural that you'd want Jewish Orthodox teachers. Similarly, Islamic school or a Catholic school, same principle applies. And the new legislation requires that in relation to what their expectations are of staff, that they will have to have a publicly available policy. What I'm keen to ensure is that policy isn't constructed in a way that would allow backdoor mechanisms of discriminating against people, for example, because of their sexuality. So say, yes, we're going to have gay teachers, but if you have a rule that says we're not going to have gay teachers in a same-sex relationship, then that starts to become a problem.
As in they've got to be able to be in a relationship. You can't ban them from being in a relationship.
Correct, or married.
From the lifestyle, whatever you want to call it, I suppose. Actually being gay involves a relationship.
Correct, yeah.
So what about a student situation then? So the same would apply. They couldn't be expelled. That's what Michaela Cash has said today. What about a student who's in school, say he's in year 10, comes out and their RE teacher in this religious school wants to have their view and tell them that is an abomination against God? Would they be allowed to?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I think what is important is that we have the outstanding business of fixing up the Sex Discrimination Act, which currently gives schools exemptions in relation to students, and I think that needs to be fixed as a matter of priority.
Right, but that's unclear whether a teacher would be able to do that?
It's unclear in my mind, but it's one of those things that...
they should be able to?
Well, I think that, firstly, the welfare of the child has to be the primary consideration.
Well, if that's the case, then presumably the answer is no.
And the answer should be no, because that directly impacts on the welfare of the child.
That view, and this
if
legislation...
it affects the welfare of the child.
Presumably it's whether it's malicious or not, and a teacher could say, it's not malicious, I'm just expressing my view and reading of the Bible. I'm at a religious school, I'm a religious education teacher.
So the test should be whether it impacts on the welfare of the student.
And that's not in there at the moment as a test?
That's not what I'm sure about. So it's a type of detail that we have to work through now that the bill's been provided to the
community. If that would allow that though, would you support this in the Parliament?
Well, let me look at the detail of that.
But I'm just asking, if what you call for is not included in legislation, could you support it?
Well, I think that the legislation needs to make clear that the welfare of children in those circumstances is paramount. But it is the type of detail that we need to consider as we look at the bill now that it's been made available. It literally has been made available in less than 24 hours. And that's one of the reasons why I think it would be helpful if there was a parliamentary committee process to allow the exact type of example that you've been raising to be ventilated, to considered, and for the government to be able to respond.
Okay, so that means you're going to go through this, but your view right now is you might not support it if some of your concerns are not addressed.
There's two different questions. So support the bill is a different matter from supporting changes to the bill, and it's issues
supporting
like
the bill
this,
in its final form is what I'm talking about.
So it's issues like this that I think that we can work through with the Attorney General.
But you do reserve your right to say, well, if things like this are not addressed, then perhaps you won't support it ultimately.
Well, I've made it clear in all the comments I've made that I reserve my right based on my analysis of the bill and the issues of concern that I still have.
It's an interesting situation that the so-called Folau case, so spoken about, isn't being addressed. So in the future, if someone speaks out, they're entitled in Australian society to express a view, but their organisation or company is entitled to say that goes against our views. It's interesting, those competing rights, isn't it?
It is, and that's one of the challenges, I think, with this bill, because human rights does not exist in silos. It exists in overlapping circles because rights can conflict. And one of the issues that I think that we do need to consider as we move forward about is whether we give primacy to any particular human right and the expression of beliefs. And that has been one of the issues that I've been raising within the government, because I think that as a matter of principle, it would be unfortunate if we ended up in a situation where we're effectively saying that views expressed founded in a religious faith have greater primacy than views expressed simply because they're something that we believe as individuals.
And in terms of that Folau case, does it end up being that he could still express himself in his church or privately, but it's when he goes from a public pulpit such as Twitter that his company could take action. But no one could ever take action against him for expressing that view within his church. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think that's right, but I think it's actually the type of conditions that you agree to when you start an employment contract. In his case, a very healthy employment contract, and employers in doing that need to be not just implementing blanket bans on people expressing views, be they religious or otherwise, but actually looking at it in the context of what is important